Excellent. I see folks signing in. My name is Ayana Johnson Watkins. I am here from the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. And I am excited to welcome you to Board Basics 101 with Reverend Dr. Todd Adams. We're going to do a little housekeeping as we sign in, and before I get to my full introductions, just in case this is your first time on Zoom or you're still figuring out how to attend a webinar, let's do a little bit of basic instruction to make sure you have all use of all the facilities on the program. So I see several of you have signed in. It's so great to see you. I want to say that Jemima Sua is joining us from the marketing department of the National Benevolent Association, and Jemima will be not live tweeting for us during this event. So we're excited to have her help. And you can look up the Pension Fund or the National Benevolent Association to find those tweets. Now let's test a few of the functions. As you move around the mouse on your screen, you should see a menu bar. For most of you, it will pop up at the bottom as your mouse sort of hovers over the bottom of your Zoom screen. For others of you, it may be at the top. But go ahead and locate that. And on that bar, you should see a little conversation bubble with 3 dots inside it that says chat. If you can, why don't you just send us a little message that says what, your name and what city and state you're joining us from, just to let us kind of make sure that chat is functioning. Great job. I see Jose is here from Kansas City. Hey, Jose. BJ's here. Randy Palmer. There's Melanie from Ohio. Wonderful to see you. Thank you all. You're doing great. Hi, Rebecca. Rebecca Hale is joining us, our Executive Vice President for MBA. Hey, Josh Patty. Just wonderful. You're doing great. All right, let's test another function. On your screen, and typically, I believe it's at the top of your screen, but just look around for a sign or a button that says raise hand and give that a test right now. Excellent. You guys are doing great. All right. Now go ahead and lower it. Beautiful job. You'll also see that I have the opportunity to lower your hands as well. So if you forget, I can take care of it for you, no problem. But both of those are ways to let us know what's happening with you. So as you may be familiar with in webinars, we can't see you, we can't hear you physically, but the chat box and that raising of the hand, as well as the Q&A box, which we'll get to in a second, are your ways of letting us know that you're here, are your ways of answering Todd if he asks you a quick yes or no question. You can raise your hands there. If you just need to get our attention, maybe you're having some tech problems, you can raise your hand and we'll chat you privately, or you can send us a private chat. If you're looking in your chat box, you'll see that just above the space where you type in your message is a little drop-down menu, and you should have options for all panelists or all panelists and attendees. So just keep that in mind as you're chatting. If it's just something the panelists like me or Larry or Todd need to know, you can go ahead and use that. But if it's something you like to share with everybody, maybe a link that you find helpful or a book or resource that Todd is referencing, feel free to use the chat to all attendees. And then finally, in that same menu box, you should find an option for Q&A. Now that's where you place your specific questions about the content that Todd is lifting up for us today. So if he's saying something and you have a question and you don't want to interrupt him, or need him to stop right then, you can go ahead and put your question in there and we will either answer it in text in that moment, or we'll let you know that we're going to answer it live at the next break. All right. So we are recording this webinar for future reference, and we're excited that our speaker has allowed us to do that, and that allows us to just share this with people in an ongoing manner. He has also so generously provided his slides so that we can share those after the webinar as well. So if you're trying to write furiously, write less furiously, you will have the slides after this presentation is over. So I just want to make a few more introductions. You'll see on the screen Larry Morris. Larry is our Incubate program associate and has been faithfully serving Incubate for a few years now. And he will be watching over the chat box and the Q&A box. So he'll be seeing if you have questions there. I'll try and keep an eye on it as well. But I'll try and moderate the live questions that we have and answer any, direct those with Todd. But both Larry and I will probably take our screens, our videos off and mute ourselves when Todd begins to speak so that you can focus on his video and presentation. But I want to take the time to say hello to Todd and let you all say hello to Todd. We have the Reverend Dr. Todd Adams with us today, the president and CEO of the Pension Fund, and a certified governance trainer with BoardSource. And so we're excited to lean into his expertise and wisdom here on this topic of board development. Now, we're going to focus today on nonprofit boards, but I know that you're joining from all kinds of different organizations. And so please do listen out for what gems may be there, even if you're not running a nonprofit right now. All right. We are going to go ahead and get started. Todd, I'm going to turn it over to you and go ahead and turn off my video. But again, if you need to get our attention, raise your hand, use the chat, use the Q&A, and we'll have several breaks during the presentation. All right, Todd, over to you.
Great. Well, good afternoon and welcome. It's my privilege to be with you all today and to have the opportunity to facilitate a conversation around some best practices and board basics for those of you who are working in the nonprofit sector. This is an area that I'm passionate about. Part of my doctoral studies focused in this area as well. Then my time with BoardSource as one of they have about 100 of us that are certified governance trainers around the country. We typically teach a very particular focus curriculum that only talks about the role of the governance board, but recognizing that there are a variety of people who are on the webinar today, I wanted to talk really about the role of different boards and where they relate and connect to you and the life cycle of your organization. And so during the presentation today, we're going to have the opportunity to have some polls and to talk back and forth a little bit to get a little data. But today, really, we have 4 objectives that we hope that we'll cover in the next few minutes that we have together. First, I want to talk with you about, I want to provide you with some basic working knowledge, some language, some terminology that you can be using in talking with your board and understanding really what is the role, purpose, and function of your board based on where your organization, your ministry is in its life cycle. Second, we want to understand how boards function differently. So management board versus a governance board versus a representative board or a fundraising board, and that you can, again, have that working language. But then regardless of what type of board you are currently working with and where you are in your organization's life cycle, it's important to understand that there are 3 duties and 3 hats of every nonprofit board member. And we'll go into detail about what those duties are, where they come from, they're part of the law, and then what those 3 hats are and how we know when our board members are wearing those hats. And then just a brief touch at the end on a basic framework for focusing on a governance board and really what it would look like as your organization, your ministry matures and grows up, so to speak, and how the board will need to shift and evolve. And also then some of this fits based on the size of your organization. So again, as Ayanna said in the introduction, pick some of the practices that fit. Ask yourself, how does this fit with the context for the work that I am doing? We do have kind of 4 movements to the presentation today. And so again, use those question and answer features throughout the presentation, but I will intentionally stop at the end of each section to have a time for question and answer, including at the end of the presentation. And so looking forward to the time that we have in front of us today. So we've got a few polls here that we want to start out with, and Ayanna's going to pop those up for you just to get a little background about who all is on the webinar, where your organizations are in their life cycle, how many board members you have, and also how often your board meets.
All right, so I see folks are figuring out the poll. Those answers are starting to come in. As soon as we get close to 100% having voted, I'll go ahead and share the poll so that everyone can see those results.
So if you're just starting out, you can be in that first category in terms of, I see that question popping up there. 1 to 3 years, you can make that 0 to 3 years, or just getting out of the blocks.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are like me and are like, what is semi-annually again? Let's say that's twice a year. So if you meet 2 or 3 times a year, you can go ahead and click that one. All right. Looks like we've hit a stall that everybody who's going to vote is voted thus far. Oh, a couple more still coming in. I'll give you a second. All right, this should give us a good sense of where we are. Let me go ahead and share these results. So as you can see, the vast majority of our folks have been in operation in a formal capacity for 10 years or more, and that's really good to know for this conversation. The majority of folks have 11 to 15 board members, followed closely by 16 to 20. And then most of you have boards that meet 6 to 8 times a year. But we also have a good number that meet quarterly, and the others aren't far apart from that. So this is an interesting spread here. Now, Todd, you can see those poll results as well, correct?
I can, yes. Just an interesting observation for me is that we have organizations that have been around 10 years, but still have boards that are meeting fairly frequently, which tends to be more of a characteristic of a board that is doing management work. And we'll unpack what we mean by that. So a board that is meeting monthly or meeting 6 to 8 times a year, but also it might be some legacy characteristics, especially if your board is, or your ministry was born out of a congregation, or your board is primarily made up of people who are on local church boards. Those boards function very much so like management boards, and they do meet frequently. Although I will, if I were doing a full governance training, we'd have a conversation about how not a lot happens in 30 days in an organization. And so even in that management capacity, it's always good to look at the frequency of your board meetings and make sure that you're organizing the board and organizing the board meeting in such a fashion that you're making effective use out of people's time. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we get into some of the characteristics here. The other thing I would lift up, I think 11 to 15, especially for more of a local nonprofit, is a great number to have on the board. When you start to get over 20, you really start to get too large of a group. And I think sometimes if you can get too small on the other end and you don't have enough people to spread the work around, so you can also burn your board members out. And we'll talk about some of those characteristics as we move through the presentation. So let's go ahead and jump into our types of boards here. And there are 4 types of boards, and I'll unpack each one of these, but a fundraising board, a management board, a representative board, and a governance board. And they each have their own characteristics and their own focus and different reasons why you invite people to be on those boards. So if you're on a fundraising board, you typically have the capacity to write a big check, or maybe you have a relationship with people who are big check writers. So all of us want to have that person on the board who has the capacity to give. It's a very important, I think, expectation of board members, regardless of what type of board we have, that all of our board members are making a financial gift to the organization, and that we're also asking them who are their friends in the community that also share their passion for our particular mission, our particular ministry, that might want to join them in writing a check as well. But when we talk about fundraising boards, we're really looking at like a symphony board or a museum board, some sort of community organization where they're not really looking for necessarily your guidance or your industry expertise. They are really looking for that check writing capacity. And maybe it's because you also serve on a foundation or you've got some grant making skills in the past and you can help them with grant writing. Jim Collins writes Good to Great and also Good to Great in the social sector. And so I use his analogy of getting the right people on the right seats on the right bus headed in the right direction. Well, in this case with the fundraising board, these are the people who are going to buy you the boat or buy you the bus so that you know the direction that you are headed. And so again, that's just kind of the basic characteristics of a fundraising board. They don't do a lot of day-to-day management. They tend to be on boards that are well endowed. When you think about a museum or a symphony, a philharmonic, tend to have their own financial endowment and then therefore sufficient staff to be able to operate the organization, not needing those kind of management day-to-day influence from their board members. So our second type of board, and I suspect that many of you have a management board, especially if you're modeling your board structure and the way in which your board functions off of how our congregations function. But a typical size congregation will be a management board. It's only once you get into our more corporate sized churches where they have sufficient staff that they have more of a governance board structure or more of a hybrid blend between management and governance. But management boards are helping you to make the day-to-day operational decisions for the ministry. Oftentimes, the reason these boards meet frequently is to approve expenditures. You have a treasurer who is a board member who is not just treasurer in title who's reviewing your financials, but is actually the treasurer paying the bills, writing the checks, licking the stamps and envelopes, putting things in the mail for you, coming by the office to pick those up, balancing the books, producing the financials, because your ministry or your organization isn't large enough or isn't mature enough yet to have its own bookkeeper, CPA, treasury program on staff. And so we need folks to make those day-to-day operational decisions with us. Also, when we find ourselves in this kind of scenario, maybe it's we own a facility and we don't have the bandwidth within our staff budget to be able to have a full-time building engineer. So when the boiler blows up or the air conditioner goes out or the roof leaks, we are turning to members of our board to help make those decisions for us or to help lead that process of getting those bids and overseeing the installation or the repair work. I think much back to my time as a local church pastor. I served a church that we worshiped about 330 a Sunday, had about 450 members. And when we built the new sanctuary, I remember saying specifically to the church leaders, the contractors need to understand my office is not the place that's going to make day-to-day decisions on how things are going with the building. My job was to build the church while the members of the church built the building. They were functioning very much so in a management capacity, making those day-to-day operational decisions. Typically, again, you have minimal professional staff. Sometimes it is the executive director who might not even be full-time themselves. Heavily dependent upon our volunteers who come in and help us to execute the program or the ministry. Again, these boards tend to meet frequently because we're authorizing expenses. We're hands-on in helping our executive director to co-lead the organization. And so we need to be together frequent. We tend to be local as opposed to bringing in people from the outside or being a national board. And a lot of times you'll see this with homeowners associations where they don't have a professional staff, or local religious communities. I mentioned congregations, or even youth sports clubs. Now, some of those do get large enough and have enough professional staff that they function more like a governance board. But pretty typically, this is the group that you would find using the management board approach. There is some limit to the organization size by the function of the board. Rather than having an executive director maybe who's out there casting the vision and a staff that is able to carry things out, you are more and more dependent upon your volunteers, upon those board members. And sometimes that can limit the organization's size simply by the function of the board because instead of being out seeking new grants or being out increasing the reach of our ministry or our mission, we're spending time getting a board agenda put together because we have another monthly board meeting. And again, that's why I think it's important to look at really how frequently does our board need to meet, and how much ministry could we accomplish, or how much of our mission could we engage with if we were to begin to distance some of those board meetings out. Even if we went to every other month, a lot more happens in 60 days to report on against our strategic objectives, to engage the board around in that 60-day period than it does in a 30-day period. I know we're a little different at Pension Fund, but our board meets twice a year for 3 days, but they are coming in from around the United States and Puerto Rico. And in case we have any Canadian friends on the phone, we have a different board for Canada because it's a separate company, and they meet twice a year as well. Again, when I served in the local church, our board got to the place that we met 5 times a year, which really began to free us up to spend the time that we were spending in board meetings and committee meetings on actually carrying out the mission. We also found that the less frequently the board met, the more focused the board meetings actually were, and the better prepared we could be, because we could collect reports in advance. So instead of a board member reading their report, that was given out a week ahead of the board meeting, much like you would in a governance structure. And so people arrived prepared, and we spent less time talking about what we had been doing and more time talking about what we were going to do, engaging in that future-leaning conversation, talking about our mission, and being more strategic and generative in our conversations. And then in this scenario, again, thinking about Jim Collins, these are the people who are controlling the bus or the boat, or maybe even helping to repair the boat or the bus to keep the wheels on and keep things moving down the road. Our third type of board that we deal with is a representative board. So if you have ever served on the general board of the Christian church, that is a representative board. These boards tend to be diverse in their makeup and very large in size. So then somehow you have to manage the size. So they are still elected and empowered by the members who sent them there. So maybe you have a board that is representative because you serve multiple congregations that are supporting your ministry, and you've guaranteed them seats on your board, and they're really there to represent their ministry. But they could also be there in a governance capacity or management capacity. But their decision-making is often influenced by the lines of accountability, because they're accountable to those who elected them and who sent them, not as much accountable to the whole organization that they're there to represent. And that's always a conflict, because as you'll see when we get to the duty of care and those 3 responsibilities or 3 duties, when you're in the boardroom, you always need to make sure that you are making decisions that are in the best interest of the mission of the table at which you are seated, not the table that sent you. And that's a challenge with a representative board. Oftentimes their work tends to be to audit the work of others, work that's been done somewhere else, and they're simply reviewing it. And there can be tension here between management and governance. It's hard to do either with a large representative board. They use a lot of committees, a lot of task forces, and then that work is approved by a larger body. It is a means to engage stakeholders, I believe, in a really pre-digital era. So you gathered people together, you engaged them in information, and you sent them back out into the communities where they came from, and back to the people that they were there to represent, in order to communicate information. Of course, as you're seeing with our live tweets here on the webinar today, we can get information out to people in a much more time-sensitive, live manner. And so not as necessary to bring people together to represent and then to carry a message back as it is about the work that they're actually accomplishing. And I describe representative boards, having worked with one in my previous role as the Associate General Minister, as kind of the aircraft carrier that Collins refers to, that it takes 6 miles of ocean and a long time to turn an aircraft carrier around. Well, representative boards are large, they can be unwieldy, they can be difficult to manage. And when the room composition changes frequently because they're sent by someone else, it's hard to get any traction to get anything actually accomplished. So I would encourage you, as you think about your board structure, to not work toward a representative board, even if you have some guaranteed stakeholders that have seats on the board. And then our last one we're going to talk about here is a governance board. Governance boards really work in organizations that are more mature and that have professional staff who are able to carry out all of the operational duties of the organization. So it's really hard to do management if you're heavily dependent upon volunteers to do some of the basic blocking and tackling of running an organization, because they are so entrenched in the day-to-day operations, and they are helping to manage those day-to-day operations, versus a governance board really works through focusing on policy creation and then accountability to those policies. So that board is empowered and elected by the total membership. Sometimes governance boards are also self-perpetuating. So for example, the pension fund board is self-perpetuating, meaning that we have a nominating process and our nominees must come from the total membership, but it is that board that reviews, vets, and then elects the membership of the pension fund board. They are there to act in the best interest of the owners. So for us, it is the actual members of pension fund and the stakeholders. So we have partners that are out there that are stakeholders to us, and we know that our decisions as a church benefit board affect our stakeholders. That could be another general ministry. It could be a regional ministry. It could be my counterpart, say at WestPath, which is the United Methodist Benefits Board. Decisions that we make at Pension Fund must be in the interest of our owners and take into account the needs of our stakeholders as well. Governance boards follow focus. They spend time creating policy, modifying policy, and holding staff accountable to that policy. There are very clear written guidelines and clear objectives that need to be accomplished at the meeting. So we have committee charters, we have a committee agenda focus telling board members what they're going to do at each very specific board meeting to make sure that we are covering all of the blocking and tackling that we're responsible for when that board is gathered together. The goal of a governance board is primarily to empower the doers or the staff, because they're not doing the actual execution and the work. They literally transfer their authority from the board to the staff, and then they are freed up to focus on policy compliance and strategic thinking. The board, in this case, also only has the committees that it needs to do its work. Maybe that's finance, personnel, executive. For us, it is pension fund. We have a governance and leadership committee, which functions like our executive committee, and we'll talk about the role of the executive committee and kind of a little summary at the end. But then also, we have a finance and audit committee, we have an investment committee, and we have a membership and benefits committee. And those committees do work on behalf of the board and then bring things back to the whole board. So governance boards are a very mature way of the board electing or the board leading an organization and then helping to hold people accountable for the work, for the mission, and for the metrics that have been established. So most of you are probably in that governance or management board, depending on where you are. But let's go ahead and jump to a couple of polls here, and let's see where people think they are. Fundraising board, management board, representative board, governance board. And then our section poll number 5 is how well are we functioning? So Ayana?
Got us up and running. The poll should be showing up on your screen, and I see that some folks have started answering. Again, when we get close to most people having voted, we'll go ahead and show those results. You know, and if you're not sure, you want to introduce some interesting subtleties to these questions, feel free to include those in the chat. That might help enlighten our conversation. So far, so good. You're doing well in the vote. I'm going to give it another few seconds to let some more people answer. All right, why don't we go with what we have? I'm going to go ahead and share these results. So you should be able to see that we do have a pretty strong tilt toward the governance board, but management boards aren't that far behind. So definitely the vast majority of our folks have one of those two kinds of boards. And then we have folks who feel like their board is functioning pretty well. But the majority say that we're okay, but we need some help. So that's good. And not functioning at all, that's fine too. I'm glad you tuned in. This is a good place to start so that you can either begin or begin again. We also have a couple of questions coming up in the chat. Todd, do you want to take those now or you want to wait?
Yeah, let's go and take them now. And if there are others that want to ask questions, this is a good pause moment for us here on this first section. And so boards, what about boards that are straddling two types, management and governance? Great question. So my assumption would be if you're struggling between management characteristics and governance characteristics, you're struggling with making the transition from kind of, if you think about crawl, walk, run, that you're somewhere in the walk, run phase, and you're trying to transition as an organization. I think what's helpful in that kind of transition is to name it, that it's not one is right and one is wrong, but that in that kind of maturation process, you grow up together as an organization and your board has to mature to come along with it. I'm going to give you some examples later on, but one board that I worked with that I was actually on for 6 years, and I was the chair of the board for 4 of those years, was the Carmel Swim Club Board of Directors. So we are a local swim community, had a lot of characteristics. I used to joke with the head coach that his role as being head coach was no different than my role as being senior minister, that you're dealing with a community-based organization, has a very particular mission and what we were supposed to do. I used the pulpit, the communion table, and the gospel. He used water, lane lines, and a weight room. But we were both leading community-based entities. When I came on that board, it was very much so a management board. We met for 3 to 4 hours. We had a kind of a treasurer of the board who sat down with our office manager and went through every check in the check register, made the financial reports for her, and really hands-on board. And a lot of interference with accomplishing the mission. One of the most transformative conversations I had with Chris, who was the head coach at the time and still is today, was he said, you know, you're my 4th board chair, and this is my 4th evaluation process. So how am I ever supposed to lead the organization, which you all are asking me to do, if nothing is consistent from year to year? And we really took that to heart as a board, and it took his willingness to step up. We had the capacity as an organization financially to have the staff that we needed. So we set out on an intentional journey as a board together to try and grow up. And we worked with BoardSource. We worked with the book, The 10 Roles and Responsibilities of a Nonprofit Governance Board. We actually brought in an executive coach, both for Chris and for the board. I could do some of it, but it was hard to be both board chair and board coach. But we got outside voices involved, and today that board no longer meets 14 times a year, 12 times a year for 3 to 4 hours. They now meet 3 times a year for a very focused hour-and-a-half meeting and are fully functioning as a governance board. So we'll give you some of those characteristics. We'll talk a little bit towards the end about what they focus on versus what a management board would focus on. But just know that there is a journey there, and it's okay to just name it and decide that that's the destination you are working towards as a board. But make sure you're bringing in those outside resources so that you're not just leaving it up to your own device. So, all right, is there a role for a governance board to help set mission and vision for the organization? Is that part of their role? That is the number one most important thing that a nonprofit governance board does. And we're going to address that coming up in a couple of sections here. So I'm going to save the answer for that, but just know that that answer is more fully ahead of us in our time together. But that's the number one most important thing that any board does, is mission, vision kind of work.
Now, we do have one question that was before those. Can a new start have a governance board? I didn't want us to miss that one.
Oh, thank you. I didn't see that one. So yes, a new start could have a governance board, but again, it depends on what are the needs of the organization. So it's really hard to have, say, we need a volunteer treasurer, we need a volunteer corporate secretary, we need volunteers in helping answering the phones and running the office and doing these kinds of things, and then ask them to back off and all of a sudden go into a governance mode. Management boards who are involved in the day-to-day operations can be working towards setting themselves up for a governance board, but you need to make sure that in talking about what type of board you're going to have, that the organization can do the basic blocking and tackling that it needs. And I will say, having been on both sides, it is very different when I am the one who knows, when I'm the one building and presenting the financial statements as the treasurer on the board, versus being the person who is reviewing the financial statements as a board member. So if I know more than any of the staff in the room about the organization's finance, I'm functioning more in a management staff role than I am in a governance role at that point.
Excellent. If that answers your questions, or rather doesn't answer your question, please let us know in the chat, and we'll try and circle back to that at the next break.
Great. Well, let's move on to our next section here then. Appreciate the questions and the engagement there. All right. So talking a little bit about policy governance and some of the boundaries around this. The question came up about what is the role of the board with mission? And I think this is the most critical thing that any board is involved in, and that is getting a clear and concise mission statement. It's got to be memorable. It ought to fit on a bumper sticker. And we're going to go through a couple of examples here in just a bit. But you'll notice here in our image, I've got the board on the boundaries. So they're on the edge of the river. The mission is leading the boat down the river, and the staff is in the boat. So whoever the captain, the executive director, the president might be, would be kind of helping to guide the ship down the river here. This is a very peaceful, serene view. I think this is what we would all hope that nonprofit engagement would be like. Nice, calm waters, beautiful, sunny, partly cloudy day, headed in the right direction and not too many challenges ahead of us. However, this also speaks to the role of the board, especially in a governance environment, because the board's job is to set those boundaries. The mission is what actually sets the course that is before you and lets you know what direction the staff then is to be rowing in or rowing toward. Now, when a ship gets too close or a boat gets too close to the shoreline or up against our boundaries, it can run ashore if the staff or the captain isn't paying attention. If it starts to creep off of its mission and get into areas that really aren't why it was brought into existence. And then that's a conversation for the board, because a couple of things have happened at that point. Either one, the boundaries are too tight, the passageway is too narrow, the board is too restrictive and controlling, and we didn't empower the doers to make decisions in the moment. So we need to broaden the boundaries. We need to widen out the kind of dredge out the river, so to speak. The other side to it is, though, an accountability issue, because it could be the staff wasn't paying attention. They got off mission. They got distracted. They didn't check the course where they were headed, and they ran the ship aground. And so then that's when you get into a very difficult accountability conversation. But this is the visual of what good board governance looks like. And you can have the same visual in a management board as well, where you have folks that are on the board in the boat with you, and also a board that is helping to set the boundaries going forward. But in a true governance, pure governance form, there would be no board members in the boat. So in thinking about their role on the board, and we'll come back more to mission, vision, core values here in a little bit, very important that there are 3 fiduciary duties of a director. When we hear the term fiduciary, oftentimes we think of just the money, but they are a fiduciary for the entire entity, its mission, its capacity to carry out that mission, its finances, the integrity and obligation to donors when we accept gifts for our particular mission. And there are 3 ways that each board member must be able to demonstrate that they are carrying that out, that fiduciary responsibility forward, especially if something goes wrong. Here's the area that a litigator, the IRS, they're going to look and say, were the board members clearly demonstrating the duty of care, the duty of obedience, and the duty of loyalty. So let's talk a little bit about what those mean. We'll have a poll at the end of the section, and that will be your indicator too, that it'll be a great time for us to stop and take some questions. And so be thinking of those as we go through these next slides here. So the duty of care is the duty to stay informed. It's the duty to actively participate in board meetings and to actively know what's going on with the ministry. That doesn't mean managing or micromanaging. It just means I have an awareness of what is happening, of how we're carrying out our mission. And that I will exercise ordinary care and prudent management for the organization. And I'm going to demonstrate that by the way in which I participate as a board member. Am I participating in good faith? Meaning, am I committed to be there? Am I showing up prepared? Am I demonstrating ordinary care? So the question that gets asked when the wheels come off the bus and there's a problem is, would a similar person under similar circumstances have made the same decision because it is what is right and informed? And we'll talk a little bit about who you can get your information from here in just a little bit. But did I exercise that degree of diligence? And did I operate reasonably in what I thought was in the best interest of the organization? So let's take kind of a really wild, just kind of out of bounds example here of violating the duty of care. You are a homeless shelter. And you have a primary mission of providing a place of respite for those who are homeless. And you've got a variety of feeding program, a clothing program, and a job placement program. So you decide that you are going to go out and buy and try and operate a coffee shop, and the board approves it. Well, what does operating a coffee shop have to do with helping the homeless in your community? And unless it's a place that you are now only employing homeless people and giving them the opportunity to go to work and to get a job, and it's the kitchen out of which you're running the feeding program, you have no business owning and operating a coffee shop. Or maybe you want to go out and buy a single piece of property, and we're going to open a high-end bed and breakfast. We're a homeless shelter, but we think it's a good investment to go open a high-end bed and breakfast because we want to host some donors when they come into town. That is not your mission, and a board approving that would be violating their duty of care, because it would not be in the best interest of the organization. It's not in the best interest of the organization to own the property, to try and manage the property, or have it as an investment. Even an organization that's as large as pension fund, we are in real estate, but we're in real estate investment trust. We don't invest in a single property because that would violate our fiduciary responsibility and our duty of care. So reasonably informed, you need to be at meetings. Hopefully all of you have something in your bylaws or your standing rules for your organization that talks about how you remove a director when they do not attend a meeting, because if they are missing multiple meetings, they are not helping you to lead the organization. A director exercising duty of care is getting materials in advance of the meeting so that they can review them, read them, and be prepared to ask a question. So our board meeting starts November 14th. Our board book is being published to the board this Thursday, November 1st. That way they've got 2 weekends that they can use to prepare themselves for the board meeting that is coming up. And that they've reviewed the materials. This is where it gets challenging for a management board that is meeting monthly because very little happens in 30 days. So it's very difficult to actually provide you with information that demonstrates anything and to get it to you advanced enough, far enough in advance for you to be able to read it, digest it, understand it, and be ready to discuss it in a healthy fashion. Unfortunately, I've been on the cleanup side of multiple embezzlements and financial mismanagements in the life of the church prior to my previous role as the associate general minister and prior to my time at Pension Fund. In each case, one of the common characteristics were financial statements either were not available, were not provided, were walked in at the last minute, were not accurate, and were not followed up on by the board. But again, when you're meeting monthly, not a lot happened in that 30-day period to really get a good glimpse. You're better off to meet less frequently and have better data further in advance so you can read it and digest it. I will not vote on a financial statement to approve it that is handed to me when I walk into the meeting and I have not had a chance to study it yet. Also, duty of care is being familiar with the local laws, why you're exempt, your governing documents. Best advice I can give anybody is know your documents. Bill Lee, retired pastor now in Roanoke, Virginia, when he was the moderator of the General Assembly, he said, Todd, know your documents. Spend a couple of days, read the design, read the standing rules, because somebody else in this room knows them more than you do, and you need to make sure you are leading the organization to live within its own documents, and you've got to know them innately in order to do that. Another part of the duty of care is exercising independent judgment. So I can get information from the staff, I can get information from independent experts, legal counsel, accountants, auditors, other board members, the board committee's work, and I can rely on that information for forming an opinion and for making a judgment, but it needs to be an informed opinion, and I need to be exercising independent judgment. So I'm not approving this because the CEO or the executive director told me I need to. I'm approving it because it's right. I've reviewed it. I understand it. Keyword there. I understand it. And I've had a chance to make an independent decision and consult with other people if I need to. The board can delegate management to the officers, to the staff, but it cannot delegate its oversight responsibility. So very clear here that regardless of what is in an employee handbook, a technology policy, a crisis management, whatever level of documents you might have, at the end of the day, the board is still responsible for oversight and for ensuring that the staff has carried out the things that they say they're going to carry out, and they cannot delegate that away. And then just some more examples here. A big one to watch out for, not that anybody goes into nonprofit or church work to get rich, but make sure that even if you're not excessively paid, that there is some sort of method by which your compensation has been determined and measured against a peer group. So local salary surveys, local information about other nonprofits, make sure that those actions are actually being taken, not because you're concerned about being a highly compensated employee whose compensation might be subject to review, but because that's the best practice, is to make sure that we're also complying with the IRS requirement there for nonprofits, that we have gone through some sort of external process to arrive at what our compensation will be. Our next duty, number 2, is the duty of loyalty. This requires you as a board member or a director to act in good faith and what is in the best and undivided interest of the organization, not for personal gain. And we had, I think, 1 or 2 that said they have a representative board, and not for what's in the best interest of those who they are representing, but that duty of loyalty says I am to make an informed decision in this room based on the best interest of the organization of which I am a director. I need to avoid or disclose conflicts of interest. I need to not use this opportunity for personal gain, and I need to maintain confidentiality about the organization's private information. So avoiding conflicts of interest, maybe it is, let's go back to the homeless shelter again. We built a building, we have a parking lot, it's time to reseal the parking lot. I'm a board member, my nephew owns an asphalt company. I want him to bid on the project. I need to disclose that, Brandon Wilson Paving Inc. is my nephew, and I need to excuse myself not only from the decision, but I should also excuse myself from the room. And a lot of people will argue that last point, that I can stay in the room, I'm just not supposed to advocate for my nephew or my family member. I believe, as I interpret this, as I've applied it as a board chair, that physical presence actually can have more impact in an area of conflict of interest than it can my ability to vote. And so I think it's good when there's that conflict of interest. You fill out your annual disclosure. I declare the conflict of interest on the decision that I physically leave the room and allow the board to make a decision that is in its best interest, and I've excused myself from that conflict. And so here's some basic things around when those conflicts exist. And again, another example of a transaction here, and a transaction must be approved by the majority of the disinterested directors, meaning the directors who have no potential for financial gain as a result of the transaction need to vote in favor, and I should be out of the room. At pension fund, because we have members that are actually on our board, the way we work with this conflict of interest is that we have policies, and as long as you are voting within policy, it's not a conflict of interest if you are benefiting from it. For example, awarding a good experience credit and you have a benefit accumulation account, you're going to receive from that decision you're making, but you're making it within policy. When we go to change the policy, that's when those who have a conflict because they could benefit from it exclude themselves and do not vote. So the 12 disinterested directors, meaning the 12 who don't have the opportunity to benefit from it, make the decision to amend the policy. And our last duty here is the duty of obedience. Again, a lot of people struggle. They don't like that word, obedience, but a director must ensure that the organization complies with the law and its regulations, that it complies with its own articles of incorporation, its bylaws, its policies, and that it remains committed to its established mission. So why we are here, what we are doing. And, I think it's very important, regardless of what type of board structure you have, to have your mission, your vision, your core values on your board agenda. I don't even think it hurts to recite them together to open your board meetings, because those are the standards by which you're supposed to be making decisions. So when I come into the room and I've got all this other stuff going on in my life, and you put this motion in front of me, the question I should be asking is, if I vote in favor of this, not do I like it, not do I believe it, not do I need it, but if I vote in favor of it, will it help X ministry accomplish its mission and move us further down the road to having our vision impact our community, or will it not? And if it won't, then I can vote against it. And if it will, even if I don't like it, I should vote for it. Because your ministry, your mission has a very specific reason that you are in existence. So when we talk about mission, we're talking about what is the need in the world that it exists, or in our community that exists, that called us into being. When we're talking about vision, we're talking about how will the world be different because of our ministry existing. And we're talking about core values. We're thinking about what are the characteristics by which we will be known in our community for the way in which we do our work. So again, that duty of obedience comes back to, did we follow our mission? Did we do this in alignment with our core values? Is this going to help us accomplish our vision? Is it legal? Is it compliant with our bylaws, our policies, our articles? And if so, I am duty bound then to support and to vote for the item. It's also important that you maintain compliance with laws, especially around as a nonprofit. There's a lot of gray area that we get into. And I don't know if the general office is still putting it out, but we used to put out an election statement every year to remind folks. And Ron Flowers at TCU, who's a retired professor there, expert in the area of church and state, was always very gracious. And my guess is you can still find that document on the website. But make sure you're following the laws to help maintain your tax exempt status, and to know what your rights are in that area. For example, if you're in the state of California as a nonprofit, you are not exempt from items that are subject to consumption tax. So office supplies, you're going to pay sales tax on them. the purchase of food and other goods. You're going to pay sales tax. It's a consumption tax in your state versus, say, in the state of Indiana, you're basically exempt from everything except for a small tax on capital items that you own, like a copy machine, maybe. So make sure you're aware of all of the laws and regulations there that you need to comply with, and that you have that expertise on your board to raise those questions as well. So let's stop here. We'll take a poll. We'll also take a look and see if we have any questions around the duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. Ayana?
You should see the poll coming up on your screen now. How often do you include the 3 duties in your board member orientation? This is just a 1-question poll, so that's the one we have up right now. Thank you for those of you who are signing in and getting those questions answered. I recognize that our phone call-in participants may not be able to access the poll, so feel free if you want to go ahead and just offer any input via chat if you're able to access that. Here we go. Todd, can you say the website you just mentioned one more time? You were talking about a place we could have some resources, pick up some resources about.
Right. I'm trying to get back to my thoughts, so I'm going to look back here at my slides and see. I saw Larry's question there. So let me.
In the meantime, I'll go ahead and close the poll. Now, this is really good to know. We have the majority of folks on the call saying we've never heard of the 3 duties before. A few who include them in their orientation every time or most of the time, but the vast majority of whom for this is new information. And this is really important because this is part of the generally understood responsibilities of a board member sort of across the board. So I'm glad that we've had a chance to get into this. And if you have any more questions about the topic, please do take this time to put them in chat or drop them in the Q&A box. We'd love to give you any more details where we can. I also want to just go ahead, Todd.
I was going to say, it is important that you are sharing these with your board members. We don't talk a lot about these at the congregational level, but it does apply, actually. And so, like, my mom has been on her church board off and on over 40-some years. And I asked her one day if they had ever had this conversation, and she said, "No, I'm just there because they asked me to chair worship, and I love God, and this is part of my way of serving my church." And so it's important that we remember, even in the simplicity of a congregational board, where we are exempt from things like ERISA and some of the other regulatory pieces that are out there, that we are still an officer of a corporation, a legal entity. We want to make sure that our board and our ministry are incorporated. So we have a church that was told to incorporate. They borrowed money. They didn't incorporate. They defaulted on the loan. And now every member of that church, because they didn't have a corporate protection, is responsible and is being sued to claim that debt. So we want to make sure we're talking about these things and that we're getting this kind of content into our board orientation when we bring on new board members.
And for our newer organizations, or even those who just want to shore up the strength and the structure of their boards, even having a board member orientation is new information. So even if you feel like, this is overwhelming, I don't know how we're going to get this done, how we're going to get this started. If you're new, just getting off the ground, please take this as part of the wisdom, look at it and consider it as you get started, and start building these pieces in a little bit at a time. Just plan, begin to put together an information sheet for new board members. Begin to put together a sheet of expectations for new board members. And then you can, as you grow, you can think about doing, your in-person orientations and all of those pieces. Sometimes you'll be able to do this one board member at a time when you're small, and then you'll have to have bigger meetings to do orientations as you grow. But it's important that you know what you're aiming for. As you grow, so that you grow into a good structure that'll make you responsible board members.
And I would say if you do nothing else for a board orientation but print these 7 or 8 slides out of the presentation, give them a copy of your bylaws, your rules, and your articles of incorporation, and your insurance certificate showing that they have directors and officers insurance, you probably, that's a great starting point for a very basic board orientation. That and a schedule of the meetings and a pledge card. We want to make sure that they're making a gift. A couple of other questions that are coming up here. So I've heard of them, but never being shared among board members. Again, this should be the very foundational piece, because this is the foundational of your board orientation, because this is the foundational piece of the work they are to be doing, that they need to be carrying out. Another question around, I hear churches talk about suspending their constitution and bylaws. What are the boundaries around suspending constitution and bylaws when organization is in a time of change? Great question. I am not an attorney, so I will very carefully put that caveat out there. It is my understanding that you do not have the legal right to suspend your bylaws or your constitution. You can amend them, but you cannot suspend them, because they are legal documents, especially your articles that you have filed with the state. And just like you can't suspend the fact that you are actually a corporate entity. So again, I'm not an attorney, but I know a lot of organizations that do it, or they say, we're just going to suspend this section. You don't have the right to ignore a section of your rules or your bylaws for a particular period of time. So it's best to recognize that we're struggling to live within those, and that we're working to change them. When I was called Memorial Drive, they had about 125 members. We had 82 members on the church board. If it weren't for 66 widows in the congregation, we would not have been able to constitute the board, because we had a requirement that no 2 board members could be on the board, or no 2 family members could be on the board at the same time. We never had a quorum. We never called for a quorum, but anybody who didn't like a decision we made, all they had to do was call for a quorum to nullify the decision. So we worked to get down to a board of 21 people. But I do not believe you would legally have the right to suspend your bylaws or your governing documents. And if those bylaws and governing documents are controlled by, say, the congregation, the board certainly doesn't have the right to suspend them, only those that have the right to amend them. That part I do know. A question maybe that is to Ayanna would be, do people part of NBA's Incubate have board insurance?
I am typing an answer to that right now, but I'll go ahead and answer it out loud as well.
Okay.
We do not provide or cover under our own insurance our Incubate partners and participants. However, Incubate partners, those projects and organizations that have a memorandum of understanding with us, are required as part of the memorandum of understanding to have liability insurance. And so we do require that they have general liability insurance. Now, does that always include directors and officers insurance, which is what Todd is just pointing to? The insurance company may or may not include that automatically, but we do encourage that you have directors and officers insurance to cover your board. A lot of times we're working with organizations that are brand new, just getting out of the gate. And so they have to work up to that financially and structurally. But that is a goal that we want for our folks. So thanks, Jose, for lifting up that question.
And then the next question here is that the duty of directors to speak in support of decisions made by the board. It is the duty of directors to make informed decisions. I believe that dissension in the boardroom, being very clear, in the boardroom, is very healthy. I get nervous when everybody agrees on everything all the time. that either people aren't prepared, they're not thinking through, we're not giving them enough information, or we're not pushing the limits of our mission. Once the board has made a decision, unless it is illegal, immoral, or unethical, a board member is bound by the decision and should not speak publicly against the decision of the board. So let's take something that would be painful in the life of maybe a regional church, selling the church camp. We've looked at the financials. The camp is bleeding $250,000 a year. We don't have an option but to put the campground up for sale. We have lengthy debate. It's an appropriate amount of time. We've done our research, our due diligence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We vote and we're split as a board, but majority rules, and it's, let's make the math easy, 12 to 8. Those 8 board members are now bound, provided that our bylaws allow us to sell property without vote of a larger body, and by that margin, they are now bound to support the decision of the board unless we have violated our bylaws, violated the law, that fits into that illegal category. Simply not agreeing with something does not give you the right to speak against the board in a public fashion. We really struggle with that when we were talking about the church and church-related entities, ministries. Now, I will say that if that decision was brought and I was not allowed to see financial statements, I was not allowed to see appraisals on the property, I was not, it was a very hurried decision, then I believe you have the right to speak against the board because they have violated their duty of obedience, their duty of care, and we were not given the proper information in order to arrive at a decision, and so therefore we violated the law. But I think in the church oftentimes we have this understanding of confidentiality. I only told one person at a time, so therefore I kept it confidential. But I should not be, as a board member, speaking against the decision of the board, again, unless it's illegal, immoral, or unethical, or violated the duty of care in terms of the decision making. All right, so we have here about 25 minutes left, and we want to get through the next part of our section here. So I'm going to go ahead and move us on. We'll have some time for question at the end, and I'm always happy to take an email every now and then from folks. So our next section here is on the 3 hats that a board member wears. This is a quick section here for us, but first they're a board member. When they're in the room, they are there to make decisions that are in the best interest of the whole. So I'll go back to the swim club as an example. We would say, as we made the transition from management board to a governance board, and as we were trying to grow up together, we gave ourselves permission to say, that is a really great parent question. But as a board member, here's the discussion we need to have. So let's take the ever controversial youth sports activity t-shirt sales question. As a management board, we were getting into 30-minute discussions as to where the t-shirt table needed to be located on the concourse to increase sales. As a governance board, that was not something for us to worry about speaking to. It was, our job was to make sure that we had a policy in place around how we were selecting vendors, how often we were RFPing those vendors, and how we were managing the money that was being maybe put into a shoebox at the t-shirt table and left overnight for the person coming in the next morning. So again, we would say when somebody would go down the conversation that was about, well, my kid did this, or that got us outside of the role of the board member, we would actually call each other out to try and break the habit of, in this room, we only wear the board member hat. We're not here as a parent. We're not here as a member of the congregation. We're here as a board member. The second role, or the second hat that a board member wears, is that of ambassador. And this gets back to the question a little while ago about how we speak about the board's actions. It's always good, I think, for board members to leave a board meeting with talking points so that they know what is going to be said publicly, or they know there's a press release coming soon after the board meeting. So our board concludes on Friday. We'll have a press release out on Monday. We will send it to our board members in advance to make sure that they have it and they know what the talking points are coming out of the board meeting. They are there to speak positively about the organization, to encourage other people to participate, to join, to attend events. So, for example, if I'm on a regional board, I should be out as an ambassador recruiting people to contribute to Disciples Mission Fund, to contribute to the special day offerings, to attend our regional assembly, and to send their kids to church camp. That's my role as an ambassador. And now as a board member, I help set the dates for the regional assembly or the budget for the regional assembly. But then my third hat is I am a volunteer for the organization. I volunteer my time, so I should be working at the regional assembly. I should be volunteering as a camp counselor. I should be helping to serve food at the homeless shelter. Whatever it is that we are doing, if I'm on that board, I should be supporting the work that we're doing in the community. As a volunteer, I should also be volunteering my money. I will not serve on a board that does not ask me for a financial gift. And if I cannot make a financial gift because I don't believe enough in the organization, then I should not be serving on the board of directors. I didn't say it had to be sizable, but I should be asked to make a gift, and I should be willing to make a gift to support the organization's mission, and that's part of volunteering as well. So let's go to our next poll here.
All right, that poll is up. How many board members on your board are making a financial gift? Got answers coming in there. As they come in, I just want to jump back, if you don't mind, Todd, to Beth's question about suspending Constitution and bylaws. And I'm really not sure if this was the direction that you were going, Beth, but it brought to mind the importance of having a succession plan or a transition plan. A lot of times organizations are thrown into a time of change, as you described it, when they unexpectedly lose a CEO or a president or a founder. And it's so important to put together a succession plan so that you're not even tempted to do such a thing as suspend your constitution and bylaws. You have a process set up for unexpected transition and change. So I'd encourage you guys to pull that up as well. BoardSource has some good templates for that. Or if you're not able to access BoardSource, send one of us an email and we'll try and send you some resources for putting together a succession plan or a transition plan. All right, I'll give you guys another few seconds to fill out the poll. Beth says, thanks, you're welcome. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll here and show this to you guys. We actually have a pretty sizable group that has 100% giving on their board, which is laudable. And the next group after that, the remainder of those who answered are in the 80 to 99% range.
So great. So very important that your board members are financially supporting your organization, especially if you're going out after community grants, because that is frequently a question that will be asked of you. Is what is the level of financial support from your board of directors and or from your staff?
Right.
So just in this last section here, and then we'll take some more questions here at the end. I want to be cognizant of our time, that we've got about 15 minutes left. Again, I've got the visual here for you around mission and the role of mission in leading the organization. I think it's the most important thing is that you get your mission right. So mission answers the question, what need exists or existed that called you into being? How will the world be different because of your organization exists? That's how we answer the vision question. Your core values are, what do we want to be known by? How we do our work, what guides us? And then as your organization begins to mature, your board can begin to focus on end statements and the what the organization is to accomplish. And then the staff focuses on how or the means by which they're going to accomplish. But the end statement piece is a very mature piece. And oftentimes our bumpers, our mission statements don't fit on a bumper sticker, especially when we get into church-related nonprofits. We want to get all the flowery theological language in there, and then we don't ever use it because nobody can remember it. So if you can't recite it, you can't state it, you can't quickly bring it out, it's probably not worth having. So this gives you a sample here from, again, going back to the swim club as we got ourselves organized. Our mission was teaching excellence through swimming for life. So what need existed? Kids needed to be taught swimming. They also needed to be taught life skills that would teach them to excel both in the pool and in the world. What was our vision? Our vision is that we would be a community club. So we serve a very specific small community. We're not all over central Indiana or all over the state of Indiana, but we would also have a national presence. We would expect to compete at the highest levels, and that our kids would learn the core values, or the organization would be known by the core values of courage, perseverance, and for the team. And then you can read these on the handouts. They get a little more specific, but again, these are end statements that are examples from a more mature organization. Who do we serve? How are we going to do it? What are the outcomes? And how do we relate to our members? And this then is what our staff was able to build a strategic plan upon. I also wanted to give you an example from Pension Fund. So our mission is for the support of ministry. That actually comes from words that Alexander Campbell penned in 1831, 34, and 35 in the Millennial Harbinger, that it was the right and duty of all disciples to receive an offering for the benefit of widows and orphans, of those who had given their lives in service to the church, and to stand for the support of ministry. So when we hear it as staff, we know there's a lot deeper meaning behind it, but our mission is for the support of ministry. That's the need that exists that called us into being. And then our vision, what is the outcome of our work, is that Stone Campbell, because we serve the full restoration movement, Stone Campbell pastors and lay employees will enjoy a strong, smart, secure retirement. We have our core values of integrity, security, and compassion. And then we have gone on to further define what those mean, as well as our guiding scripture. And then you can see our end statements here, and I won't read those to you. But from these end statements, we then built a ministry plan. We're now building a strategic plan. And when I talk about accountability, I report on these 5 end statements and what we've done since last April when the board met to work towards accomplishing these end statements. End statements should not change. These are not annual goals. These are more larger, global, that have goals and metrics that are underneath them that you then engage with in the course of doing your work and living out your mission and living into your vision. So another quick poll here is, how many of your board meeting agendas have the mission, vision, and core values on the agenda, preferably, but at least if not somewhere in your board materials?
All right, you'll see that poll is up, and I see the responses coming in. We'll take another 30 seconds with that. Please do continue to leave your questions and thoughts in the chat box or in the Q&A box. We did have at least one person who needed to leave, but I really appreciate those of you who stuck around to this point in the webinar. It really means a lot to us, and we hope that the information is and continues to be useful to you. Taking a few more seconds here. I think we have a pretty clear picture. All right, go ahead and share the results here. And Todd, I think you'll like these. How often?
I do like those.
Yes, indeed. So this is really great to see that those of you who are on this call really made a practice of including your mission, vision, and core values in your printed materials so that they're in front of people every time that they meet. You know, we're creatures of habit and repetition. We need these things. We need to be brought back to this. I know at MBA, we are constantly using our mission, our vision, and our core values, especially in my role, to keep bringing us back to what it is we do and why we do what we do.
It's also the litmus test against making decisions. So when you think about the duty of care and making an informed decision, does this decision, whatever it might be, help us accomplish our mission, our vision? Do I know it as a board member? Can I recite it? And that would be what I would ask or encourage you at your next board meeting. Maybe challenge your board members before they even open the board book. Who in the room can actually recite our mission statement? Start there, very simple. And then not only is it good to have it printed on your agenda, but let's read it together. Let's engage with it and get it out in front of people and remind them that it's there. And then, like I said, it also makes a really great reporting structure, especially for me as the president, to be able to report to the board and use that as the framework to say, hey, here's what we've said we're going to do. Here are the 5 end statements you've given us, and here's how we're driving towards those. Again, to have that accountability piece. So just a few little last second best practices here, and then I want to open it up and see if we have any other questions. This starts to get into characteristics of a mature board, shifting to policy making versus day-to-day management. I think the challenge we have as staff reporting to a board is we're reporting on what happened in the last 30, 60, 90, 120 days, but we also need to make sure that we're leaving enough space in our reports on this as to what's coming up, how we're leaning into the future, how we're looking toward the future, what our goals and objectives are in order for the board to help shape those and our implementation of that as well. A little brief thing here on executive committee. Again, I've unfortunately in my previous role in the church worked with several embezzlements, mismanagement, employee theft scenarios. In almost every case, the executive committee was being overutilized. An executive committee should only meet in advisory capacity to the executive. They should only meet when the board cannot be called into session. They should not substitute for a board meeting. So please don't have your executive committee meet and say, hey, we're supposed to meet 3 times as a board. We can't afford to do that, so we're going to meet twice as a board, and the executive committee is going to meet once. The executive committee should only act where the bylaws or standing rules specifically state they can. And any actions taken by the executive committee not only need to be reported to the full board, they really should be ratified by the full board. Again, in these scenarios where got off mission, wheels came off the bus, you had an over-functioning executive committee that was replacing the board in the work that they were supposed to be doing. Second point there is on executive session. Use it sparingly. I recommend that it's on every single agenda. So if you were to look at the upcoming board meeting for the pension fund, you'll see 4 places that we use executive session. They're already listed out. One is after I do a public plenary report, I go into executive session with the board as president to report on any personnel matters. Second, I do the same thing with our governance committee, which is our executive committee. When they do my evaluation and my compensation, that's done in executive session. Third, executive session with our auditors. So there is an opportunity for board members to ask questions of our external and internal auditors without other staff present. And then finally, we have one that's just listed at the close of the meeting. And out of habit and best practice, it is there if needed. And the reason I suggest that you have it, even if you don't use it, is someday you'll need it, and you don't want it to seem like you're duck and cover by going into executive session. Also, the General Assembly has given some really good guidelines on open meeting policies and when you should go into executive session, what should be included, and I've included a link here to that. You can find that reference point on disciples.org, and that was approved by the Orlando General Assembly in 2013. And then just some basic blocking and tackling things to make sure, regardless of management board, governance board, that your board needs to be doing. Identify the resources needed to properly operate the organization. That includes contributing to them. Establish policies for how these resources will be required. Plan strategically for the future, including capital needs. Determine how board members will participate. So again, ask them for a gift and contribute. This room should be filled with givers, not defined by the most, the largest givers, but also people who have relative percentage based on their capacity to give. So we're not just looking for the big check, but also folks that are giving within their means. Basic blocking and tackling, approving an annual budget that's in writing, an annual audit or conversation with the auditors, having an endowment policy, how do we deal with wills, estates, and memorial gifts, and some basic internal controls. I think what I'd like to do, I've got a few more slides here. Those are just visuals. I think this is what people think of when they hear about all these controls. Like, oh, that's going to be so complex. This is what they often look like in the life of the church, simple and out of date. And we often rely on trust. And at the end of the day, trust is not an internal control. So I want to make sure we've got, and I gave you the list here of the 10 responsibilities of a nonprofit governance board. So when you're doing pure governance work, you ought to be able to check off in a 2-year cycle, 3-year cycle, that we're doing all of these things that are on this list of 10 here. So let's see if we have any questions to wrap it up. We got about 5 minutes left, and want to make sure we give a chance for folks to ask.
Thank you so much, Todd. This is really, really good information. Again, we will have these slides available after the webinar is over. You'll also, let's say you have a last minute question or something that occurs to you when you wake up tomorrow morning, you can send that to me by email, and we'll try and get that answer out to you. Again, we thank you for staying around for the whole webinar. We hope it was helpful to you. Feel free to leave questions, but also comments in the chat box. You'll see that Larry just left a link to the book, Good to Great, that Todd was referencing earlier by Jim Collins. There's even a special edition of that is particularly for socially responsible or social service. There it is, Good to Great in the social sector. Another really great resource for folks in our line of work. I don't see any other questions jumping out unless you guys are typing, but so I'll give you another minute just in case. But again, while you're doing that, I want to thank Jemima Sua again, who's been live tweeting for us along the way. Some great quotable moments that she has lifted up from Todd's presentation. We're glad to have those. You should get a follow-up email in the next couple of days letting you know, how you can reach out to us with further questions and where those slides can be found. Can you quickly share a little bit more, I see from Ben, about the relationship between the president, CEO, and board of directors? And this is a question I get quite a bit from our Incubate partners as well. So Todd, do you want to touch this?
I am, and I'm going to see if I can pull up here quickly a chart. Switch out to a presentation I did here a couple of weeks ago. There it is right there. So the board of directors and the CEO need to have a really good working relationship with one another. The president, CEO, executive director is the only employee that the board has. So they don't employ the associate director, they don't employ the bookkeeper, they employ the one executive, and that's all the board can actually manage and direct. Let's go from current slide here. So in terms of accountability, it's really hard to hold somebody accountable to something that's not in writing, which is why I stress the end statements and then developing a ministry plan based on those end statements. But you can see here on this slide that what we're looking for is that upper right-hand corner, which is constructive partnership with the board. So we're leading together, we're mutually accountable. It's a non-defensive environment. It's not a room full of my friends and buddies, but it's people who are committed to the mission of our organization. The danger is that a board can start to micromanage. And typically when that happens is because there's not enough information that it's provided. And so they're digging deeper and deeper, and they get off track and into the weeds because they haven't thought enough about what their role is as a board, and they're not getting the right information. Upper left, governance as observation. This is where the leader starts to displace the board. So they're making decisions independently of the board. They're misconstruing actions that they were authorized to do, and they are overacting on their part. And then down in the bottom left is when nobody really cares. Governance is attendance. We have a board meeting. We showed up, we checked a few boxes, we had a nice lunch, we all turned in our expense and reimbursement forms, and we went home. But we didn't really do anything. So in that constructive partnership, upper right-hand corner where we're leading together, we're really talking about clear lines of accountability, clear written documents, measurable metrics that are reported on, a board that has enough information to make good decisions, and that they have the capacity then to follow up at the next board meeting and hold you accountable for what they asked you to do at the last board meeting. And oftentimes that doesn't happen with our boards, or they're meeting so frequently you haven't had time to do it, and then it falls off the plate. So that leadership, that upper right-hand corner is constructive, but it's measurable, it's replicable, and it's where we're mutually holding one another accountable. But we're led by, again, think back to the boat, the mission of the organization guiding us down the river where the boundaries are clearly marked.
So thank you. Thank you for that last question. That was a good one, Benjamin. Thank you all for being present on the webinar today. I'm going to stop recording now, but we just want to say thank you so much for joining us. And we hope that you'll stay tuned to the MBA website to see if future webinars might be helpful to your ministry and work. Thanks so much, Todd. And we look forward to seeing you all
My privilege.
around.